Well, good day. So, for today's video, we're gonna talk about the first cartoon appearance of some classic comic strip crime characters. I'm talking about Dick Tracy, Flattop, B-B Eyes, and Hemlock Holmes. So, alright, let's go.
Yeah. So, we start off with Dick Tracy getting a phone call from the police chief about a robbery happening at the East Side West Side National Bank. And worse yet, the ones holding up the bank are the villainous Flattop and B-B Eyes. So naturally, Dick Tracy rushes out to the scene of the crime and whoa, wait, what? He doesn't? What do you mean he doesn't? Who goes out there? Dick Tracy calls Helmlock Holmes to send him out there to stop the crime? Oh, well, okay. I guess, at least someone's going out there, right? So Hemlock Holmes gathers his squad of police officers called the Retouchables, and they go and try to stop the deadly duo doing the bank heisting and stuff. Shortly, Flattop grabs the money and gets into the getaway car which B-B Eyes is driving, to where a police car chase ensues on the massive interchange. And, I gotta say, I do not have a whole lot of faith in these retouchable police officers. They don't know whether they're coming or going. At one point, they're chasing B-B Eyes. At another point, they're being chased by B-B Eyes. Nothing makes sense. But B-B Eyes has a plan to get the cops off of their tail. He sets up an elaborate trap in a phone booth during a car chase? What? Where the hell do you find the time for this, man? The cops were right on your tail. Nonetheless, he's able to trick Hemlock Holmes with the old dynamite phone receiver trick. But quickly after that, the Retouchables have the crooks cornered and are making sure they stay put. But unfortunately, these coppers, ain't really the brightest in the bunch and are accidentally giving Hemlock Holmes a bit of a lesson in crime fighting. Ay. This can't be good. And to think that Dick Tracy actually trusts these guys, eh? Later. So, the car chase is back on even if it's Flintstone style. But it doesn't last too long because B-B Eyes is stopped by a fish truck blocking the road. So instead of him and Flattop getting out of the car and running away, they just totally hang out on the road, watching as Hemlock Holmes flies into the back of the fish truck to where B-B Eyes and Flattop get stuck in a barrel of fish. So the day is accidentally saved! Hooray! B-B Eyes and Flattop are headed to the slammer, the Retouchables recovered the money from the bank, and Hemlock Holmes gets praised by Dick Tracy. And with that, that is the end of this, crime tale.
So that was pretty interesting there. Kind of a bit of an emotional roller coaster in a way. I was really excited to see Dick Tracy fight some crime. Instead, I get to see Hemlock Holmes fight crime. Because Dick Tracy has a desk job? Well, I guess Tess Trueheart always wanted him to have a desk job, so I guess that part works out. But still, the show's called Dick Tracy, not Hemlock Holmes. Also, it's really great to see some Dick Tracy villains like Flattop, who is definitely my favorite Dick Tracy villain. And he did pretty good in this one. The voices that they used for Flattop and B-B Eyes were actually pretty spot on, so good job. It's just, man, this cartoon did not feel like a Dick Tracy story. It actually felt exactly like a Rocky and Bullwinkle story. For one thing, Dick Tracy has always been criticized for being just a little too violent. Even back in the comic strips, in his original movie serials and stuff like that, they thought if kids are watching this and reading this, it should be less violent. And then you get to this cartoon series, which is the exact opposite of violence. This is so ridiculously slapstick. Like, actually, even beyond slapstick. What is beyond slapstick? Like, slap wall or something? I don't even know. But that's what this is. Even in the car chase scenes, which was, well, pretty much the whole cartoon, I am very surprised that Benny Hill music was not playing in the background, you know? Silly, silly, silly! Which is kind of odd because there have been other crime-fighting characters having cartoons at this time, like, let's say, Batman and Robin, or Superman, or Flash, or whatever. And those cartoons, even though it had some kind of silliness to it, they were still taken pretty serious. But c'est la vie, at least we get some kind of form of Dick Tracy cartoons, you know, so it is what it is. But still, you know, I guess it's a fun little zany cartoon for, like, the youngins, you know? So, there's that. But other than that, we do have some more behind-the-scenes kind of things about Dick Tracy and Flattop and, this and that and all that other kind of stuff going on over here.
So yes, indeed, hey? Dick Tracy, one of the greatest fictional detectives of all time. So how did he come to be? Well, here's the quick little rundown. Dick Tracy was created by cartoonist Chester Gould, and Chester was inspired by the heroics of the U.S. federal agent Eliot Ness, the Prohibition-era agent who went up against the likes of Al Capone. No nonsense and pretty darn good at his job. He led a team of other federal agents known as the Untouchables. Which, for a quick little side note, is kind of funny because in this episode, Hemlock Holmes is running a team called the Retouchables. Kind of like the opposite of Eliot Ness and his team, you know, but they still somehow get the job done. Anywho, so Chester Gould wanted to call this detective of his Plainclothes Tracy. Plainclothes being a slang for a detective because he does not wear a uniform, he just wears plain street clothes, right? The would-be publisher of this Dick Tracy comic strip, Joseph Medill Patterson, suggested that Plainclothes Tracy is a bit too long and wordy of a name. Another nickname for a detective is Dick, so why not, you know, just Dick Tracy? Short, complete, and to the point. He also convinced Chester about a backstory for Dick Tracy, of how Dick Tracy was inspired to become a detective after his fiance's father was killed. Which is exactly what happened. So you put some of that stuff together and boom! Dick Tracy debuted in the comic strips on Sunday, October 4th, 1931. So for the first little bit, you know, Dick Tracy was doing pretty good. You know, he had a pretty steady, faithful following. But once he started to really get a whole bunch of really interesting villains to fight against, this guy hit superstardom! So much so that in 1937, he was voted the third most favorite comic strip, losing out only to Little Orphan Annie and Popeye. But, as I say, as popular as the character Dick Tracy was, his incredible rogues gallery of villains were just as popular. And none other more popular than Flattop. Flattop was based upon a real-life gangster in the Depression era called Pretty Boy Floyd. Parts of Flattop's background is mirrored to that of Pretty Boy Floyd. For example, Flattop started as a freelance hitman from Crookston Hills, whereas Pretty Boy Floyd was a freelance hitman in Cookson Hills. Both were also said to be involved in the Kansas City Massacre in 1933, just to give you an idea of how crazy this Flattop is. One of the more violent characters from the Dick Tracy villains. And he made his first appearance in December 21st, 1943. The other villain in this episode would be B-B Eyes. B.B. Eyes first appeared in January 27 of 1942. He was a tire bootlegger, stealing and selling a whole bunch of tires because during World War II, tires were pretty scarce. You know, they were all going towards the war effort. so B.B. Eyes had a pretty good racket going. And he also had a bone to pick with Dick Tracy, because Dick Tracy killed his brother Jacques. But three pretty popular characters, right? One of the most famous things known about Dick Tracy is his two-way wrist radio watch, a staple to the character. And this fantastic invention was first debuted on January 13 of 1946, which we see him using in this featured episode and Hemlock Holmes as well. Also, with Hemlock Holmes, I guess really not a whole bunch about this guy, you know? They wanted Dick Tracy to run a bunch of silly characters, and one of them being this dag. So they had an idea for a British police officer, so they figured to use an English bulldog. The name Hemlock Holmes, obviously Holmes is from Sherlock Holmes, another legendary fictional detective, and Hemlock sounds like Sherlock, so it's close enough. But Dick Tracy, hey, like, holy jeez, was this guy super popular. So, as I say, he started in 1931 in the comic strips, and it didn't take him too much longer to break into other forms of media. So, starting in 1934, we had the Dick Tracy radio show, which ran for 14 years. Also in that show, they did have some episodes featuring Flattop. But he even went beyond radio, getting his first movie serial in 1937. Not only that, but this movie serial also got 3 sequels after it, which had new serials produced in 1938, 1939, and 1941. And that launched Dick Tracy into the movies, getting his first movie in 1945, and 3 more sequels to it in 1946 and 2 in 1947. Starting in 1948, he would start to get his own regular series comic books with their own original stories from Dell Comics and I think Harvey Comics. Also, with television coming along means a new Dick Tracy show, which happened from 1950 to 1951. This show also featured the first live-action appearances of Flattop and B-B Eyes. And all of that would eventually lead up to our featured episode from the Dick Tracy show in 1961. So you're all caught up! There would be some other Dick Tracy cartoons after this, not really a whole lot. There was one episode of The Famous Adventures of Mr. Magoo, where he fought alongside Dick Tracy in an episode called Dick Tracy and the Mob from 1965, and also in 1971, Dick Tracy was a featured segment in the show Archie's TV Funnies, which did feature more of a serious Dick Tracy type of storytelling than our featured episode did. And if you really want to go beyond that, if you're like me, you were a massive fan of the 1990 movie Dick Tracy starring Warren Beatty. That movie, hey? So good, man. So good. But that's the pretty quick little rundown from the origin of the character to how we got to our featured episode. So for all of the other stuff, we will get to it when we get to it. But for now, with this, that, those, and the other things, I guess that's that. Also, if you're interested, I created my own comic book channel, 215 Comics. And currently, I have created my own cartoon series, The Adventures of the Density. And recently started a radio series featuring my newest character, Elastomorph, with more titles to come. So if you want to check it out, I'll leave a link up top here to that channel and some links at the end of the video. Yeah! Right on, and there you go. So thanks for watching the video. I hope you liked it as much as I did making it. Also, feel free to check out the source material that I featured in this video. And if you want to leave a comment on anything you may have liked or things I might have missed in this, feel free to do so. Or anything else, just to say hi. That's cool too. And other than that, have a great day. Thanks.